What is up, my people, and welcome to episode 2 of the Equestrian Physio on air. I actually don't even know if I love that intro yet. You know, my people, my crew. I've even heard one podcaster that I listen to talk about, my chickens, So I don't know if we really have a collective here, but we'll go with my people for now. And if there's anything else, any other collective term that you guys would prefer, feel free to toss those suggestions my way. Hey, I'm Katie. I'm a physiotherapist, strength and conditioning coach, and lifelong rider dedicated to helping equestrians build strong, capable, resilient bodies, both in and out of the saddle. This podcast is here to empower riders of all levels with evidence-informed rehab, training, and education. And we're not just here to follow tradition for tradition's sake. We're here to challenge outdated norms and bring critical thinking and curiosity to how we train, ride, and show up. Let's get into it. So, here we are, episode 2, which means I wasn't so scared by episode 1 that I didn't come back to record something else. That's totally fine, though. I feel like typically my pattern is I will go all in on something or it will peter out fairly quickly. So we'll know usually if I make it to like episode 10 or 12 whether I'm keeping up with this or whether it is just not the medium that is going to jive with the way that I want to connect with all of you guys, and we let it peter out. The experiment remains to be done. Little life update for me. Nothing exciting. Right now, I'm actually staring at some cute little pottery mugs that I made at a networking event. So I went to this networking event. It was run by my business coach, Emma Jack, who is a phenomenal human being. If you're looking to connect with someone who is just really empowering, really amazing, really knows her stuff in the physio clinical space, she's a great one to reach out to. Anyway, she had this workshop, which is intended to be like a networking event, but they thought it'd be really fun to run it at a pottery studio. So it was actually quite lovely. It was able to take the afternoon off, go connect with some really fun, like-minded individuals, vibe, make a couple, I don't even want to call them they're not quite cups because they're not really like tall enough to be cups, but they're not really big enough to be bowls. So they're kind of just this in-between vessel. But anyway, so we threw a couple of those, we vibed, we had cookies, we chatted, we were able to reflect, we were able to kind of like not console, but like we were able to validate each other's experiences as like small business owners and entrepreneurs. And it was really kind of nice to just be in ended up being all women, but it was just really nice to be in this group of like women who think the way you do and vibe the way you do and connect the way you do and just have an afternoon to connect that way while also getting some mugs. So this week, after the pottery mugs dried and then were fired and then glazed and then fired again, Emma came by the clinic to drop them off. And so I've got them sitting here in front of me. One of them is kind of like oblong, so it's not really like a round cup, but the other one turned out quite nice. But it's like more, I don't know, a little bit bigger than like maybe a Japanese teacup, maybe like twice the size of that. I don't know. They're cute. So that's it for me. That was pretty much the highlight of my day. But what I was interested to come on tonight to chat to you guys about is a concept called periodization. So if you've been following along with me for a little while, you'll know I've referred to this topic or I've touched on this topic once or twice in the social media space. And so today I kind of wanted to just break down like what is periodization? Why does it matter? Even if you're kind of newer to the lifting sphere. And then how do we take these concepts both as athletes, as equestrians, but also what if we apply them to the way that we train our horses? You know, one of the things that I often think about is like not even just getting riders lifting or getting riders more engaged in the physical space, because I do think that's amazing. And I do think that a lot of us don't know. It's a little bit like you don't know what you don't know. And if you haven't experienced being strong and being fit and feeling that level of capability that comes with training your body out of the saddle, which I was totally there. Like I spent decades riding and not doing anything else other than like the odd run when I got my ass handed to me on cross country one time and my cardio was abysmal. But I really didn't do any sort of training and I thought it was good enough. I thought I was good enough. It wasn't until I started training that I'm like, oh damn, is this how easy it's supposed to be? Is this what I'm supposed to feel like? Like it was a really interesting switch. But beyond that, beyond just literally the physical transformation, the physical capacity that we can build, I think another really big piece that I would like to see come into the equestrian world is just an understanding of these concepts, an understanding of basic strength and conditioning principles, basic exercise physiology principles, basic ideas of progressive overload and structured programming and graded exposure and all these kinds of things, and taking that to the way that we train our horses, the way that we build out our training programs, the way that we start our youngsters, that we formulate our competitive seasons, all these kinds of things. Not that, I mean, it is one of those things that you don't know what you don't know. And sometimes it's fine and things are moving along without any issues. But I do think as a whole, the industry could be elevated if we all were able to have a basic understanding of these things and apply it to our own training and our own horses. Just a thought. Anyway, diving into today's topic, we were going to jump in on why periodization matters. So as I like to do, we typically start with a definition. So what is the definition of periodization? If you jump on like the National Strength and Conditioning Association's website or check out their textbook, Essentials of Strength and Conditioning, like any of those other sort of like basic bare bones strength and conditioning texts, they will come up with some sort of definition that periodization is a systematic, logical, and planned variation in training specificity, intensity, and volume to optimize performance and recovery. And basically, that's a fancy way of saying that we've studied physiology. We've studied how mammals tend to adapt to certain training stimuluses. And we've found that having some variation, not too much variation, not too little variation, having some undulation in the way that we train does tend to help with adaptation, does tend to help with injury management, fatigue management, all that kinds of things. And that if we can build a foundation where we can have a stimulus lead to fatigue, lead to sort of overloading the body in a very controlled way, have that lead to adaptation, have that adaptation lead to general building, like your body adapting to that and building up its tissue tolerance, building up its capacity, then that is generally a good thing. But if we continue on just a path of linear, do more, eventually we tend to get to a point where we burn out or we overload or we just risk injury because we're kind of pushing too much too fast. Now, there are a few different kinds of periodization, and where you are in terms of your training age is a little bit how we tend to apply things. So your very basic is going to look like linear periodization. And that is the just keep adding more. So it is generally just a gradual increase in intensity with a decrease in volume over time. So if you start lifting, say you are squatting a barbell for the first time in your life, and you're like, okay, I'm just squatting the bar. That is 45 pounds. You're doing that for a couple weeks, and you're like, this feels pretty good. You're doing sets of like 8 to 10. You feel like you're getting stronger. You feel like you're figuring out the movement pattern. Then what a linear periodization model would look like is that you add a little weight to the bar, but maybe you decrease the rep range a little bit. So you maybe add 10 pounds to each side. Now you're at 65 pounds, but instead of doing 8 to 10, you're doing 6 to 8, right? And then we kind of keep along that. So you would be starting at something like 3 sets of 10, and then you're progressing to a lower rep range, but a higher effort over something like 6 to 8 weeks. Right? The timelines are somewhat variable because it depends a little bit on your own training experience. It depends on how fast your body's adapting. But essentially, we're trying to move to heavier weights and lower reps. It's a very straightforward linear process. And this is quite common because we're typically trying to create variation in the way that we're training without necessarily adding variation in the movement patterns. Now, as a little aside, why don't we want a massive amount of variation in our movement patterns? There's a few reasons for that. Number one, novelty in our movement patterns is often what creates kind of an excessive or a disproportionate amount of muscle soreness. So delayed onset muscle soreness, or the acronym DOMS, is that really common experience that we all get after working out, after going for a run when we haven't after a while, or, adding new weight to the bar, or going for a rather intense ride. And then you feel like you can't get off the toilet for the next 3 days, or you added, you rode a horse that was just like a very strong ride that you're not quite used to doing. And then you're like, I can't lift my arms now. That is delayed onset muscle soreness. And delayed onset muscle soreness tends to be most prominent when we are constantly switching up what we're doing. So if you're constantly doing new exercises, if you're constantly doing different variations, different things, yeah, it can be fine for training, but you are going to be sorer than you would be if you just stuck to similar movement patterns, like sticking with similar squats or similar types of deadlifts or stuff like that. So yeah, so that's one piece of it. The other piece of it that often kind of disproportionately creates soreness is volume. Very high volume will often create more soreness, or a lot of like eccentric loading is another one where you're going through the lowering phase or the lengthening phase of an exercise. Those are the kinds of things that will also create a little bit of excess muscle soreness. So typically, if we're trying to manage fatigue, if we're trying to reduce muscle soreness, we want to work our way towards lower volume, which means on the inverse of that, if you want to be working hard enough, that we have to be doing a higher intensity. So if you're only doing 4 reps in a set, you need to obviously be lifting a higher weight than if you were doing 10 reps in a set, because you're trying to reach a similar level of fatigue, like a similar level of muscle exertion with each version. So yeah, so that's linear periodization. That is one way that we will look at it. And that is one that I honestly use quite a bit, especially for novice lifters, where we will start with higher volumes for a few weeks because I really want that rider, that athlete to get used to a certain movement pattern. And then we work our way towards heavier and heavier lifts with less reps because I want them to get a true sense of how strong they actually are. Plus, again, it's a different way to just add variation and reduce novelty so that the soreness is a little bit better. We can also see undulating, or sometimes called nonlinear periodization. So this is where we will kind of go cyclically through different volumes or intensities. And so like we might vary our volume and intensity for a certain movement from week to week. We might even vary it session to session. So, like one session you're focusing on higher reps, lower intensity. Another session you're maybe in a mid-range. And then towards the end of the week, you're focusing on a very high intensity, low rep kind of scheme. This is something that can help avoid plateaus. Sometimes it also helps people if they're just like, they really don't like getting bored and they want a little bit more variability. It's something that's not always necessary, especially if someone is a newer lifter. Like a typical linear periodization model is often fine for seeing progress if you don't have a lot of training experience. But if someone just wants a little bit more variability, a little bit more creativity, or just wants to experiment with different things, non-linear periodization is totally fine. And then another type of periodization that we often see is block periodization. So this is where we will organize our training into specific blocks, so specific sets of weeks or a certain timeline where we are going for a specific goal. So that may be like, okay, one block is 4 to 6 weeks and we are training primarily for strength. Another block, maybe we are training primarily for power. Another block, maybe we are training primarily for hypertrophy or endurance. And so we're kind of shifting our goals depending on what the block is. So why should equestrians actually care about this? One of the things that I often say is that like periodization, it is maybe a little bit more of an advanced concept if you are newer to training. And so the question is like, why don't we just show up, add weight to the bar, push to a certain level of intensity and just repeat that? And you can totally do that. But what I found in my experience is that having some variability in your training, even if your training age is low, allows you to kind of benefit from that structured exposure over time. So if we are kind of creating this periodization, one, like I said, you're learning the principles, which is useful for applying to your own training and your horse's training. Two, we have these built-in rest periods where you are aiming for lower intensity times, you are aiming for lower intensity periods in the training schedule, where you might peak for a certain period and then you're dropping back off for a certain period, and then you peak again and then you drop back off, and allowing those to line up with life events, competition schedules, stuff like that. I find that is a very useful way to intentionally apply periodization, because what happens is in real life, if we don't line these things up intentionally, they're going to be lined up for us, right? Like we're going to have a week where we're sick and oops, okay, that's now a deload week because it has to be because you feel like shit. You might have another week where you're peaking just because, I don't know, you feel amazing and you just got the best night's sleep ever. And I don't know, your best friend's visiting and you just feel super hyped. So these things will happen. Typically, I find if we can schedule them in, if we can kind of create them intentionally, then it allows a little bit more structure. It allows a little bit more progression over time. Also, having these built-in rest periods for those of us who are like really, really gung-ho and sometimes push, This allows us to kind of manage that overall fatigue and that injury risk. Because if we're constantly just adding weight to the bar, adding weight to the bar, adding weight to the bar, pushing reps and adding volume, then eventually we get to a point where our body isn't able to kind of keep up with the demands of what we're asking of it. And that doesn't guarantee that you're going to be injured, but it does increase the risk overall. So having a little bit of undulation, a little bit of periodization in our schedule helps avoid that. And also just helps avoid your own burnout, right? Like if you can have, 4 to 6 weeks where you are sticking to something that is intentionally training in a certain way. So you have a certain set of movements, you have a certain set of goals, you have a certain rep range that you're working in, you can benefit from the adaptation that happens to those specific demands. But if you know, 4 weeks from now, 5 weeks from now, I'm going to switch to something a little bit newer, it helps avoid some of that, that burnout or that boredom, because you know that you have novelty coming up. The main thing is that when we are programming, again, both from the muscle soreness standpoint and also just trying to drive adaptation, is that we want to stick with something long enough to actually see our body adapt to it, but not so long that we're kind of missing out on other things that we could be benefiting from. So I'll give you an example. If, for example, we want to progress our squats, like make them heavier, improve our form, whatever kind of your metric is that you're aiming for, it doesn't really make sense to squat with a low bar 1 week and then squat with a high bar the next week, and then do a goblet squat the next week, and then do a heel elevated squat the next week. Like you're constantly kind of changing variations. So it's hard, one, for your body to actually adapt and progress in a certain variation. And two, you're going to be dealing with more soreness because you're continually switching the script. Plus, you're probably not going to see much progression in whatever squat variation you're using as kind of your metric because you're constantly switching around. Are you going to get stronger? Yes. Are you going to be able to measure it or actually see that progress very easily? Probably not. So that's why we want to stick with similar things, similar movement patterns long enough to see progress, but then we want to have variability built into our program that allows us to cover all of our bases over the course of a certain time period, right? So if I looked at all the different movement patterns, all the different potential exercises, all of the different muscle groups that I want someone to be training, it's very hard to fit everything into 3-4 training sessions a week. But if we stick with a certain set of main movements and accessory movements for 4 to 6 weeks, and then after that time period, we switch to a new set, it allows us over the course of several months to a year to cover everything. So maybe for one period, our focus is on calves and adductors, and you are doing accessory work that kind of has that focus. And then for another period, you're focusing on more core accessory work and quad accessory work. And another period, you're focusing more on a hamstring accessory work and lateral glute accessory work. So we're constantly kind of switching it up, but you're sticking with something long enough to actually see that adaptation. I hope that makes sense. The other thing is that horses follow these same physiological principles, where if we stress a tissue, the tissue will adapt, the tissue will recover, and the tissue will progress. And a lot of us are already periodizing our horses' training without really realizing it, right? We're doing conditioning blocks, we're doing skill works, we might be doing a bit of a tapering or a couple days off before a show, and we're allowing your horse's plan to kind of fit within their show schedule or their performance, right? We're trying to offer them this, but we're not necessarily naming it periodization. And I think that's where, again, a good understanding of what these principles are will help overall in not just our own training, but our horses. So this is also how I've designed the Equestrian Physio training app. And it's not like when I say I've designed it, this is not a new concept. Periodization has existed for a very long time. I did not invent it. I am not the first to learn it. I'm probably not even the best to explain it. But here we are. And the way that I've kind of laid it out is that for the majority of riders that are using the app, I designed it kind of from a competitive sense, where we have our main seasons, in-season training, pre-season training, or off-season training. And so the periodization is very much a linear periodization, like we are typically working to kind of a peak strength type of thing, but we are cycling through a new training block every 4 to 6 weeks so that riders have, again, the ability to kind of stick with one movement, adapt to it, then add a new movement so that over the course of the entire training block, they have adaptation occurring, but they have enough variability to kind of cover everything. And then we periodize it into these different seasons to align with the schedule. So the preseason is focusing very much on kind of like building, right? We want to focus on hypertrophy work, muscle building. We want to focus on endurance. We want to build towards more sport specific types of skills. So maybe some power component, depending on your discipline, maybe some more advanced mobility work. Again, it's written for the discipline, but we are kind of prepping for show season. Then when we're the in season, right, our biggest thing is that we want to manage fatigue. We don't want to overload ourselves. We want to make sure that we are getting enough training to maintain what we need, but not so much that we're tired and that we're actually like limiting our capacity to compete and be effective in the saddle because we are tiring ourselves out with training. And so that's where the in season is dropping back a little bit. We are going for a little bit higher intensity, lower volume, because that's allowing you to kind of manage those fatigue levels. We want heavier lifts because we want to maintain the muscle that we built in the preseason, but not so heavy or not so much volume that now your legs are toast and that you go to get on your fourth horse for the day and you're like, I can't because I squatted yesterday. It's just not working. No, we want that balance. The other thing too is that when I designed the in-season programs for the app, I designed it as like a 2+1 week. So your main weeks in the preseason and off season, those are typically 3 workouts a week. In the in-season, it's like a 2+1. So you have 2 primary workouts that are intended to cover everything you kind of need. But then there's like one extra workout that is, if you miss it, it's not the end of the world. It's mostly just accessory work or optional things. But if you ended up hitting it, then great, it's still going to be a benefit to you. So that's the way I've kind of designed that one. And then in your off season, little bit of recovery, a little bit of just kind of like deloading, because most of the time that's planned for like after someone's championship or before they move to Florida or California or wherever you're going for the winter. I'm talking North American here, but if you're in the UK or Australia, you obviously have your own equivalents. But yeah, from there, a little bit of recovery in the off season, but then we're building again. That is more focused on main strength. So we aren't so sport specific. We aren't so skill focused. We are focused more on just, okay, how do we build up a generally resilient human to handle the needs of being in the saddle, right? It's intended to have built-in mobility or deload or peaking strategies that are all kind of centered around the show season, centered around giving someone that kind of pattern where we work for a few weeks, we kind of build up, and then we have a little bit of recovery week so that we always have that ability to let our bodies kind of go through this undulating pattern, have that built-in recovery, and support riders as they move through their training. So yeah, I hope that makes sense. I will probably dive into more of these concepts as we move forward and add some clarification to this, but I think the main takeaway is that periodization is a very useful concept, and it's a very useful thing to apply to your own training and your horse's training. And you don't necessarily need to be a pro athlete or have a very long-standing training history to benefit from this structure. It helps give you a plan, it helps protect your body and give you some intentional recovery, and hopefully it helps you ride stronger over time. So if you like this episode, if you appreciate my content, if you appreciate picking up what I'm putting down, then I would greatly appreciate you if you could share this episode, if you could like, and because I'm just starting this podcast, if you could leave me a review, honestly, that would be the best thing. So thanks, guys. Appreciate you, and I'll catch you on the next one.